Welcome to the Great African Leadership Series, where we feature great inspirational speeches and quotes from African leaders.
Thank you. So when I was 17 years old, I wrote a book of poetry, really bad poetry, that I now hope that nobody will ever read. But true to the delusional ambition of youth, I thought that this was a wonderful book. And in Nigeria, when a book is published, it's customary to have a book launch to introduce the book to the public. And so I set about planning a book launch for this terrible book of poems. There was a powerful man in the media who I knew would help with this book launch. And so I found my way into his office in Lagos. And I told him about my book. Would he please support the book? I asked. He was very impressed, he told me. While other teenagers were hardly reading at all, I was serious enough and focused enough to have written a book. He was pleasant, avuncular, warm. And then he got up from his desk and walked around to where I was seated, and he stood behind me. And in a move that was as swift as it was shocking, he slipped his hand under my button-down shirt, under my bra, and squeezed my breast. I was so taken aback that I did nothing for seconds. Then I pushed his hand away, but gently, nicely, because I didn't want to offend him. Later that day, I broke into a rash on my chest, my neck, my face, as though my body were recoiling, as though my body was saying what my lips had not said. I felt a deep loathing for that man and for what he did. I felt as if I didn't matter, as if my body existed merely as a thing to be done with as he wanted. Yet I told no one about it, and I kept talking to him, being polite, hoping he would help with my book. I was a feminist long before I knew what the word meant. I didn't read feminist texts. I just simply watched the world. I knew that the world did not give to women the same dignities that it gave to men. I was aware of how much the socialization of women was focused on men. Don't wear a miniskirt or a man will rape you. Learn to cook and clean so you can keep a man. Don't be too ambitious so you don't intimidate a man. Don't always say what you really think so that you can protect a man's ego. I've felt heartened by the Me Too movement because it means that finally women's stories are being believed. Because there are now real consequences for the men who harass women. Because for too long, women did not tell their stories because they felt that they would not be believed or that they would somehow be blamed. But much as I'm happy about the consequences men now face, I increasingly find myself thinking about the women. How do we think about restitution? Is restitution even possible? How do we measure resentment? How do we measure the complexity of women's experiences? We are, after all, human beings. We are not a collection of logical bones and flesh. We are emotional beings. Our motivations are not always easily measurable or easily quantifiable. And so, for me, it is the story, the narrative, that can begin to reach these subtler and necessary parts of women's experiences. We should change laws that diminish women, but changing mindsets is as important. We should enact policy that supports women, but changing cultural attitudes is even more important. While I've been very happy, if happy is a word that one can use about the Me Too movement, about Me Too, I've also felt concerned about the way it's been covered in the media and by the abstract language often used in the media. So in the US, I would read the news and think, what does sexual misconduct mean exactly? I wanted the story. I wanted the detail. Because it is storytelling that creates context. It is the story that provides the kind of detail that can educate people. And it seems to me that we all need some education on the subject of sexual harassment. It is the story that makes it difficult to silence women. It is storytelling with all of its nuance and all of its complexity that can make clear the difference between sexual harassment and what isn't sexual harassment, that can make clear that when sexual harassment happens, it is much more about power than it is about sex. And I think it is storytelling that can make clear that women know the difference between what is consensual and what is not. I hope that Me Too will become the beginning of a real revolution, one that will end with women finally being full, autonomous human beings in the world. But there is still so much work to do. So it's wonderful to have laws that expect a father to take time off to care for a new child, which I hear happens in the Scandinavian region. But how does society really think of that man who takes a lot of paternity leave? That man who stays home while the woman works? Do we really see it as completely neutral? Is domestic work really gender neutral, or do women still do a majority of it? The politics of domestic arrangements matters very much because the discourse around women and work is really about domestic work. If the traditional expectations were not that caregiving and domestic work were primarily for women, then there would be no need for us to have conversations about, can a woman have it all? Because we never speak about whether a man can have it all. Literature is my religion, and I've learned from literature that all of us human beings are flawed. And I've also learned that all of us have the possibility of redemption. We can remake the world, I believe that. We can remake masculinity. We can change it from this narrow cage that traps men into a humane idea. We can expect men to be vulnerable. We can give men the language of emotion. We can teach men to respect the autonomy of women. We can encourage little boys to cry. We can create a world where women can be full sexual beings, where slut shaming never happens, where women face no backlash for being bold or for being angry or for being aggressive or for being ambitious. We can create a world where there are many women in real positions of power, because representation matters. We can make a world where we all collectively support those human beings whose bodies do the difficult and physical work of ensuring that the human species does not become extinct. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and I really hope that she lives in a world that's better than the world that I live in. Thank you.
And share this video with friends and family to support the channel.